What if one of Hollywood's most beloved icons suddenly turned his camera on the very powers that be? Imagine George Clooney, synonymous with charm, cinematic brilliance, and global goodwill, stepping into a role far removed from the silver screen. Picture him unveiling a damning documentary that exposes the darkest secrets of the state, igniting allegations of political treason, and sparking explosive confrontations with the world's most powerful political figures. How would the world react when a man known for his suave diplomacy transforms into a relentless crusader against corruption? Get ready to journey into a realm where art meets audacity, where a single film challenges the foundations of power, and where every word and image on screen forces us to ask, what price does truth really demand? It was an unexpectedly chilly evening in Washington, D.C., when whispers of an extraordinary project began to circulate behind closed doors. In a modest but secure studio near the heart of the nation's capital, George Clooney had been working on a documentary that promised to shatter the carefully constructed facade of governmental power. Clooney, long known for his humanitarian efforts and his subtle, artful critiques of injustice, was now poised to take a bold leap into political activism. This wasn't just another film. It was a mission to reveal a shadowy network of political treason and institutional decay. The project had started as a personal inquiry. Over years of traveling and meeting with grassroots organizations and dissidents, Clooney had gathered fragments of evidence suggesting that certain high-ranking officials were involved in clandestine operations designed to consolidate power at the expense of democracy. What began as isolated rumors and hushed conversations evolved into a labyrinth of documents, leaked memos, and eyewitness accounts. With the help of an intrepid investigative team, comprising veteran journalists, ethical hackers, and whistleblowers from within the government, Clooney embarked on a journey to expose what he called the dark side of the state. In the early months of production, the crew faced relentless pressure. Sources were frightened into silence, and anonymous threats began to circulate. Clooney's own security detail was put on high alert as mysterious figures trailed his movements. Yet, driven by an unyielding sense of responsibility and a passion for truth, he pressed on. Night after night, Clooney would review hours of raw footage in his private screening room, piecing together a narrative that was as riveting as it was unsettling. The documentary, titled Shadows of Power, was set to premiere at an international political film festival. It promised an unvarnished look at covert operations, revealing how influential political figures had manipulated policies, undermined democratic institutions, and even orchestrated cover-ups that spanned decades. The film's structure was meticulously crafted, interwoven interviews with whistleblowers, undercover footage from secret meetings, and chilling archival documents that painted a portrait of systemic betrayal. It wasn't long before the anticipation grew to a fever pitch. The night of the premiere arrived with a palpable mix of excitement and tension. The red carpet outside the Grand Theater in D.C. was teeming with journalists, activists, and political pundits. Cameras flashed relentlessly, and social media buzzed with the hashtag shadows of power. Clooney, ever the epitome of composure, arrived in a tailored suit, his eyes betraying both determination and a hint of vulnerability. He greeted reporters with measured responses, all while the weight of the revelations he was about to share pressed heavily on his shoulders. Inside the theater, the atmosphere was electric. The auditorium was packed with an eclectic mix of attendees, intellectuals, reformists, political figures, and curious citizens, all eager to witness a watershed moment in political discourse. As the lights dimmed and the opening credits rolled, a hush fell over the crowd. Clooney's voice, warm yet resolute, emerged from the speakers. "Tonight," he began, "we stand at the crossroads of truth and power. What you are about to see is not a work of fiction. It is a revelation of the real forces that have shaped our society in secrecy." The film unfolded like a slow-burning fuse. One segment detailed the harrowing journey of an anonymous government insider, whose testimony unveiled a network of backdoor deals and covert operations. Another featured a former diplomat who, with trembling hands, presented incontrovertible evidence of political collusion and betrayal. The visuals were stark, grainy footage of clandestine meetings in dimly lit corridors, redacted documents splashed across the screen, and maps that connected names to nefarious networks. With each passing minute, the film's narrative became more damning, its pace quickening as if time itself were running out. Then came the moment that would change everything. Near the film's climax, Clooney intercut live footage of a press conference with footage from the documentary. On stage, a prominent political figure, one whose name was synonymous with power and influence, denied every allegation with a calm, rehearsed rhetoric. But Clooney's documentary had already shown incontrovertible evidence of treason, secret recordings, financial records, and testimonies that left no room for doubt. In that instant, the tension in the theater was palpable. Gasps echoed, and the audience sat in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. The film ended not with a flourish of music, but with a simple, haunting statement on screen. When power betrays the people, silence becomes a crime. The lights slowly came back on, and for a long, charged moment, no one moved. Then, as if a dam had broken, the auditorium erupted into applause, shouts, and even some angry jeers. The reaction was instantaneous and divided. While many hailed Clooney as a hero, a beacon of truth in a corrupt system, others branded the film as a politically motivated witch hunt. Almost immediately, the live broadcast of the premiere was shared across social media platforms. Tweets flew like wildfire. Clooney just exposed political treason on live TV. One read, while another questioned, is this really the truth, or just a Hollywood stunt? Hashtags such as hashtag Shadows of Power and hashtag Clooney Exposes trended globally, igniting debates in online forums, cable news, and late-night talk shows alike. In the days that followed, the fallout was monumental. Prominent political figures were forced to address the allegations, with some vehemently denying any wrongdoing and others calling for independent investigations. The documentary was the subject of heated parliamentary debates, televised interviews, and even academic conferences. Clooney found himself at the center of a maelstrom of praise and criticism. In interviews, he spoke with measured clarity. This documentary is not about defamation, it's about accountability. Our democracy depends on truth, and the truth is that the dark underbelly of power must be brought to light. But the road was not without its peril. Clooney's bold foray into political exposé had its own share of risks. Shortly after the premiere, his office received a barrage of threatening messages. Anonymous emails warned him to retract his claims, and some even suggested dire consequences if he continued his crusade. Clooney, however, remained undeterred. His resolve only hardened as he continued to engage with supporters and critics alike, insisting that transparency was the only way forward. One particularly dramatic moment came during a follow-up press conference in New York City. Clooney stood before a throng of reporters, his eyes calm, but his voice resolute as he detailed the evidence behind the documentary. I have seen documents, spoken to brave individuals who risked everything to expose the truth, he stated, his tone unwavering. What you witnessed in the film is not a conspiracy of fiction. It is the reality that many of us have been too afraid to confront. His words resonated with many, yet incited scorn from others, who accused him of stirring up division for personal gain. Meanwhile, the documentary continued to spark international debates. In Europe, scholars and activists organized symposiums to discuss its implications for global governance and the erosion of democratic institutions. In Asia and Africa, grassroots movements seized upon Clooney's revelations, as a rallying cry for greater accountability and reform. Across every corner of the globe, Shadows of Power was dissected, debated, and celebrated as a transformative moment in modern political discourse. Within the corridors of power, however, the reaction was more subdued and secretive. Behind closed doors, political insiders scrambled to mitigate the damage. Several high-ranking officials met in emergency sessions, and while public statements insisted on the integrity of the system, there were murmurs of unease among the elite. The film had not only exposed corruption, it had shaken the very foundations of trust upon which power was built. As weeks turned into months, the lasting impact of the documentary became evident. Investigations were launched, both by independent watchdogs and by government bodies under public pressure. Some of the very allegations presented in the film were revisited in courtrooms and legislative assemblies. Clooney's work, initially dismissed by some as mere theatrics, began to be cited in policy discussions and reform agendas. His willingness to risk his reputation and safety for the sake of truth was lauded by reformers and civil society organizations worldwide. In a series of reflective interviews, Clooney explained the personal cost of his venture. "When you stand up against the mighty, you must be prepared for everything," he remarked one evening in a candid discussion with a veteran journalist. "I knew the risks, threats, isolation, and even the possibility of being vilified. But I also knew that the silence of complacency is far more dangerous than the roar of dissent." His words underscored a deep belief in the power of accountability, a principle that had driven him to undertake one of the most controversial projects of his career. Critics, however, remained vocal. Some argued that Clooney had overstepped his bounds, that a Hollywood actor should stick to art and leave politics to the experts. Editorials in major newspapers decried the film as a politicized stunt aimed at defaming government institutions. Yet, as more evidence emerged and several independent investigations validated portions of the documentary, even many of his harshest detractors were forced to acknowledge that Clooney had touched upon uncomfortable truths that could no longer be ignored. The saga reached a turning point during an international summit on transparency and governance, where leaders from across the globe were invited to discuss the state of modern democracy. In a surprising twist, several dignitaries cited Shadows of Power as a catalyst for reform in their own countries. A renowned European minister publicly commended Clooney for his bravery, saying, "This film has forced us to confront our own shortcomings. It is a wake-up call for all who believe that power should be exercised without accountability." Such endorsements further amplified the impact of the documentary, cementing its place in the annals of political history. Today, Shadows of Power is more than a film. It is a symbol of the unyielding quest for truth. Its ripples have inspired a generation of activists and reformers who continue to demand transparency from those in power. George Clooney, once known primarily as a cinematic icon, has now also become a beacon for accountability, reminding us that the fight against corruption and injustice is a shared responsibility. In quiet moments away from the relentless glare of media scrutiny, Clooney reflects on the journey that led him to this point. "I believe in the transformative power of truth," he confides in an intimate interview. "Our democracy, our very way of life, depends on it. If we do not hold the powerful accountable, then we all lose." His voice, imbued with both resolve and humility, captures the essence of a man who has risked everything for a cause greater than himself. The world continues to debate the merits and pitfalls of his daring exposé. Yet, amid the controversy and polarized opinions, one thing is clear: George Clooney's revelations have ignited a conversation that shows no sign of fading. Whether viewed as an act of political treason or a courageous stand against tyranny, his actions have irrevocably altered the landscape of modern governance. His clashes with political elites, tense, fraught, and unyielding, have forced a re-examination of the systems that govern us and have paved the way for a new era of public accountability. As the years pass, Shadows of Power remains a touchstone for those who believe that the truth, no matter how difficult, must always come to light. In boardrooms, classrooms, and protest rallies across the globe, its impact is felt, a reminder that the battle for justice is never over, and that even a single voice, when raised in defiance of corruption, can change the course of history. And so, as the curtain falls on this chapter of political upheaval and cinematic courage, the legacy of that fateful documentary endures. It is a story of confrontation, resilience, and the unshakable belief that power must always be questioned. In a world where darkness often lurks behind the polished veneer of authority, George Clooney's bold stand continues to inspire, and to remind us all that truth is the most potent weapon of all.